and our distinguished lecturers, Professor Ron Matthews is already with us here, and well, hello. Hello. Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm thanking deeply to Professor Ron Matthews for sharing his important time with us to give the lectures on current global military technology advancement and where the developing countries fit in. Before we start, I also would like to thank you to all of participants who are also willing to come for these lectures. Professor Matthews, the participants here, some of them are my students, Can you raise hand who are my students? Okay. Noha, this one, yeah. So, some of them, because we are basically is in the semester break. Some of them, those who are from Indonesia are also going home to their home village. But there are some other students that come from other faculties. It is also my two students that just arrived. There are also friends who would come for these lectures, which is lectures from other universities, to include friends from Universitas Indonesia. If Universitas Indonesia, they have one I, UI, and this campus we have three I's, triple IU, so it's different I. I don't know, with more I's means better, or one I is, but mostly the longer one. The other participants come from the professionals, friends, from some of private companies, and also from the Indonesia's cyber security community, and some of them also from Indonesia Air Power Studies Center. So we have a bunch of participants here. Well, thank you for all of you to come to this seminar. Basically, just to give you some introduction, this lecture, we put it within the framework of Brownbag Seminars, that we used to have that program, and this is 44th series for the Brownbag Seminars that we have for the last, 2.5 years or 2 years since the Faculty of Social Science being set up. Okay, I would like now to introduce Professor Ron Matthews. He flew far away from England and stopped over in Abu Dhabi, and to come to here to our brand new university. We call it just startup universities, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia. Well, Professor Ron Matthews currently holds the chair in Defense and Security Capability at Rabdan Academy in Abu Dhabi. Professor Ron Matthews is also a visiting professor at Cranfield Defense and Security at the UK Defense Academy in Rajaratnham, United Kingdom, which he was also the chair for the program of defense management at the same university. Professor Ron Matthews also formerly Professor of Defense Economics at the Rajaratnham School of International Studies, RSIS, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And he wrote many books. The first is on the political economy of defense. The second one is on the managing the revolutions in military affairs, which his book is also used for the reference in my class. And there is another book titled Japan's Military Renaissance, European Arms Collaboration, Policies, Problem and Prospect, and also the book on defense production in the third world, with the case of India. In addition, Professor Matthew also wrote a lot of articles in journals and many publications, to include one of them in collaboration with our ladies here, with Kuri Maharani Sapitri, for the some of journals that he published together with her. I think this is that I would like to introduce for him, and again, it is a great honor for us, Ron, to have you here, and we are looking forward to learn from you, and also learning the wisdom how basically the developing world could maybe catch up, utilize, or filling the gap within this very fast development of technological system that currently developing internationally. Okay, thanks very much, and please, the time is yours, Professor Ron Matthew. Yeah.
Thank you, Rifki. So look, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be back in Indonesia. Secondly, it's a privilege to be here at the start of what looks to be a terrific university project. So I'm going to talk for approximately 1 hour, and I'm sorry that it's going to be that long. And then you'll have opportunities to ask me questions on the substance of the talk. I noticed that it's a brown bag talk. And my experience of brown bag talks is that the only person that doesn't get to open the brown bag is the lecturer. So please enjoy the food, and I'll eat mine later. So this is a topic that I was given by your university. I've slightly changed it because I understand that the program here is focused on competitiveness and also technology. And the thrust of my talk will be to look really at the importance of the ongoing military technological revolution. And I'm going to filter in some material from my own publications and a piece of work that I've been focused on in collaboration with my son. He's at Birmingham University, and he's an ecologist, and he's interested in butterflies, birds, beetles, and I'm interested in hardcore pornographic defense. So it's an interesting intellectual combination, but I think, as you'll see, there are some interesting messages for this particular topic. So this is the introduction, if you like. I'm a defense economist. This is my background. And unfortunately, defense is important. It's there particularly for developing countries to defend development, to defend independence. But the big question is, how much is enough? How much should poor and developing countries commit their scarce resources to defense expenditure, where hopefully the products of that investment will never be used? And in defense economics, we believe that this expenditure, although important, is a diversion of scarce resources from the more productive commercial economy. So there are some really important policy questions here. Defense is important, as you can see now with the conflict in Ukraine, and potentially in Taiwan, not far from your location. The reading isn't terribly relevant in this context, but there are a number of papers that are written on the subject that I'm going to address, particularly the US-China competitive rivalry in artificial intelligence. A paper that I wrote and got published in the Diplomat magazine, you can access on the web. It was published August the 14th, 2023. And the piece that I'll be talking to you about, the relationship between military equipment and animals, has been accepted for publication, but will not be published on perhaps the end of this year. So me, who am I? Well, my focus is on defense, and particularly the economics of defense. But my background is development. And I notice there are some participants from Africa, where I have a great fondness, and have spent many years teaching in Ghana, in Ethiopia, in Uganda, in Kenya. And some of the challenges of development are profound in that region. It's plagued by conflict, which undermines the opportunities for development and deters foreign investment, so restraining economic growth. So my background is development economics, which I studied at Glasgow University. And if you're an economist, you'll know the importance of that university, because that's where the first principal economic theory evolved by a gentleman called Adam Smith, who was the professor of political economy at Glasgow University. So, at a point in time, I moved into defense. I won 2 NATO research fellowships, and today, and indeed the development of my academic career, has been focused on the marriage between defense and development, the contribution that defense makes to development. It's not always about destruction, it's also about construction. The British military spend a high proportion of their time engaged in peacekeeping, peacemaking, trying to restrain drug running, post-conflict governance and transparency, particularly in Africa. And in the defense area, in exports, there's a field called offset, where that's also seen as a vehicle for transferring commercial technology as well as military technology. So that's what I do, that's what I tend to focus on in terms of research. In terms of the key themes today, I'm going to be looking at national security, and particularly within that, economic security. So yeah, please note that whilst the focus of the talk is on defense, it's also going to embrace broader development activities. And economic security is critical. Indonesia is an emerging country. It has a huge military endeavor, but its focus has got to be on the investment into the economy to create jobs, to develop infrastructure, to promote human capital, so that it can increase the standard of living of the people and generate the resources that are necessary for investing into defense. It's no accident that the richest country in the world, the United States, is also the biggest major military power. The second biggest economy, China, is the second biggest military power. So military power tends to go hand in hand with economic strength. So we look at economic security, competitiveness, we look at the revolutions associated with defense, and then we focus on affordability, which is a big challenge in Indonesia. Now, January the 11th, 2024, the the United States launched a new defense industrial strategy. Two core elements within that. Firstly, it recognized for the first time the importance of economic security within defense. Why? Because the majority of technologies in modern weapons systems derives from the commercial sector. Cyber, artificial intelligence, 3D printing. And the second important element of this defense industrial strategy was to recognize the importance of supply chains as part of defense industry. Supply chains are critically important, not just for the commercial environment, but also for defense. So these are the themes that we're going to examine. And to begin, we acknowledge that it's impossible to have national security in the absence of economic security. But it's about trade-offs and it's about balances. It's about deciding how much should be spent on defense and how much of the scarce national resources should be allocated for investment into the vibrant economy. I used to teach in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I used to teach economic security. And the students easily recognized the importance of the subject. Because what they were interested in, although they were military, border guards, tax inspectors, was having the opportunity to make money to support their families, to get their kids into good universities, to have infrastructure which facilitates economic development and growth. Now, many of the African countries do not have this type of opportunity. And that's why there's mass migration now to regions like Europe for a better life. So economic security is critical for stability, for investment purposes, and also to ensure that there's sufficient money to invest in the defense of democracy of the country. So, what we've witnessed over the last few decades is the emergence of a plethora of different types of security. Traditionally, national security equaled defense. That's what national security was about. But not anymore, as witnessed by the US defense industrial strategy that I just previously mentioned. Here I've selected just a few. At the top is economic security, but you can have human security, welfare, the provision of health services, energy security, climate security, sustainability, all interpreted as elements of broader national security. And perhaps the starting point in looking at this new approach was Japan. If you're interested in the different interpretations of national security, have a look at the Journal of Defense and Peace Economics. I published a paper there last year on Singapore's total defense. Total defense. And its interpretation of national security included not just defense expenditure, but the economy, the health of the economy. It also included psychological and social security, and importantly, technology, to sustain itself against any form of threat, not just military threat. So, if you go back to Japan in the 19th century, it started to evolve a framework for understanding national security. Now, if you look at this, it looks like a bicycle wheel. At the core is the hub, national security. And the spokes leading from the hub, which reinforces the stability of the wheel, are these elements here. So defense is only one component of national security. Equally important is technology. Technology for the commercial sector, technology for defense. To the Japanese, technology is power. Without technology, you have nothing. But also the economy is important. For a vibrant, healthy economy, you need technology. For a robust defense sector, you need technology. Also political stability, diplomacy, lots of other ingredients here, including foreign aid. Japan has no natural resources, no oil, no minerals. 85% of the country is mountainous. It's essential, therefore, that it secures international supply chains to support industrialization, and the output, much of which is exported. So it creates wealth through its investment in human capital and the transformation of raw materials from abroad into higher value products. It's a simple equation, but for Japan it works, and works very well. So this is called comprehensive security, where all of the elements are interrelated. And it's also identified the threats. And the threats are growing. But even here, going back decades, it talks about the threat of cyber warfare, pandemics, including COVID more recently, that destroys, undermines economic activity. And you have the defense area, which supports the country in deterring threats. And the threats will include national disasters, such as earthquakes and tsunamis, the challenges of terrorism, nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. So the threats are increasing, just as the definitional framework of national security is also expanding. So there are policies in place in Japan that will focus on this broad-based security. Now this is really important, and it's one of the messages for an audience like yourself, that today defense industrial strategy must also encompass the broader commercial economy and exploit the opportunities for civil-military integration. It's wrong to think that artificial intelligence, sensors, cyber, 3D printing, telecommunications are just part of the commercial sector. They're also part of the redefined defense industrial base. And you need to have policies to promote the broader interpretation of defense. So, focusing still on this balance between defense and development, you have this diagram here where the red function is the production possibility frontier. And the argument here is that any country at a point in time has a collection of capital and labor resources. And if you're producing here this level of weaponry, it's associated with this volume of consumption goods. If you start to dramatically increase the production of weaponry, then resources will have to relocate from the commercial sector. Witness the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. 80% of scarce investment resources went into defense, and nothing was left for investment into the civil sector. Even food became scarce. Same with North Korea. So there's got to be a balance here. And in Indonesia, which is looking at these trade-offs in the short run to try and achieve an appropriate balance between defense and development, one way forward is to consider moving the production possibility frontier to the right. And that will allow increases potentially in both defense and development. And how do you do that? How do you shift that production possibility frontier to the right? Somehow you can increase the amount of capital and labor resources. Capital principally through investment in human capital, but just as importantly, you can promote innovation, in improving productivity, getting more bang for your buck in defense. So this is a simple message highlighting the importance of innovation. And at the heart of innovation, of course, is research and development. Here is another way of looking at this relationship between defense and development. And this is a more positive perspective. What you've got here is the significant relationship between military expenditure and national income, gross domestic product. Now, we won't mention Indonesia yet, but think about Japan. We call the product of this ratio the defense burden. The defense burden. The defense is a burden on the economy because of the crowding out of important resources like capital and human resources into the defense sector. Better it was invested in the more productive commercial economy with bigger opportunities to export and develop this sector. So in 1976, Japan determined that its defense burden, its relationship between military expenditure and national income, would be constrained to 1%. This was determined by the Japanese government so that it wouldn't be seen as a military threat in the region again. 1%, which is relatively small. But here's the trick. What Japan was able to do during that period was increase its national income dramatically, perhaps by 10%. We called it the economic miracle. 10% annual growth in national income. And that allowed Tokyo to increase its defense spending by 10%, a huge amount, without any change in the 1% defense burden. So magically, it was dramatically increasing defense expenditure, even though it was keeping that ratio to 1%, because of the vitality of its economy. Again, if you think about defense and economics, there's a powerful relationship which links both together. So the message again to Indonesia is don't just focus on defense, focus on the important strategic sectors of the commercial sector that will stimulate broad-based economic growth, which in turn will benefit defense. So as Bill Clinton once said, it's all about the economy. That's what's important. Still keeping with Japan, again, a message for Indonesia is looking at what the Japanese call techno-nationalism, the focus on technology. The thrust of your program here at your university. So the Japanese, over the last 2 centuries, have sought to develop their technological capability by accessing foreign technology through international cooperation on the development of aero engines and also aerospace, its strategic relationship with Boeing, where the Japanese big industrial conglomerates like Mitsubishi and Kawasaki have a major strategic relationship with the American commercial aircraft manufacturer Boeing. Japan takes 35% of the value added of these Boeing aircraft, a full-blown partnership. Also through offset. Now, I'm not going to talk much about offset because I don't have the time. But offset is pursued by your government so that when you procure foreign military aircraft, you will demand some form of technology transfer, and quite often that transfer is to facilitate indigenous production capability of military equipment. It's seen as an easy and quick way of accelerating local defense industrialization. So in Japan, they will buy F-15 Eagle fighters from the Americans, and in the same factory, they will be building commercial airliners. And the objective is to encourage technology from defense into the commercial sector. High technology from defense. So this is what this second stage is all about. The Japanese government, since the end of the World War II, have been promoting the development of strategic industries. The government has proactively established these strategic industries. High value, high skill, high levels of research and development. And it just so happens that those industries are aerospace, maritime, information technology, all of the critical technologies that we describe as dual use. They are relevant for commercial aerospace just as they are relevant for military aerospace. So it's a form of civil-military integration, and that's what this is about. Civil-military strategic industries, where the Japanese authorities seek to encourage technology innovation spin-offs from defense to the commercial sector, and from the commercial sector to support defense. Mitsubishi is a conglomerate, hundreds of commercial divisions, but also defense divisions. And if the defense divisions get access to American high technology in the form of weapon systems, there is the potential to distribute that technology to the sister commercial divisions. So promoting not only defense industrialization in the country, but also higher levels of commercial innovation. And you do it the other way around, in reverse. So you get technology spin-off from the military to the civil, and you get technology spin-on from the civil to the military. And it's a way of reducing what is described as technology spin-away, meaning the high social cost of defense expenditure to the broader community through a high degree of civil-military integration. And ultimately, the objective is independence, self-sufficiency, what the Japanese call kokusanka, self-reliance. You guys have been embargoed from access to Soviet military equipment because your government made decisions which Moscow did not like. And then subsequently, you were embargoed by the Americans, the French, and the British over East Timor. So if you can secure true defense independence, it's important because when you go to war, you've got security of supply. You're not dependent on overseas suppliers. But indigenous defense development is expensive because you've got to engage in your own R&D and the development of your own skills. But this is the form of strategic thinking that other countries pursue. And so what we've got then is the notion that competitiveness drives civil-military success. There are competitive rivalries between Russia and the US, between China and the US and Europe, over gaining not just commercial advantage, but military advantage. So competitiveness is seriously important. China is able to transport its geopolitical agenda because it's enjoying high scale of production in the development of military hardware, and it's also got the money to invest in important programs in the civil area in Africa. And now the West is waking up to this and is beginning to respond. So it's all about geoeconomic competitiveness, commercial competitiveness, and military competitiveness. And that drives innovation. But also important is research and development. I've tried to secure the data for Indonesia's defense R&D. And it's impossible. You do publish a figure from 2022 thereabouts to 2025, and it's about 5.2 billion US dollars. But it's not just R&D, it also includes procurement, and that's high cost. So we have no sense of what Indonesia is spending on defense R&D, but I suspect it's not very much. So that reduces your competitiveness. You take the United States, in 2022, in the defense area, it spent 112 billion US dollars on defense R&D. That's something like 12 times your entire defense budget. And this is at the heart of the problem for Indonesia, in my view. So, research and development is critical. And we need to focus on that if we're looking forward into the future to examine new military capability. I put this slide on for you to understand the importance of R&D for one defence company in the UK. So this is a bit dated now, 2016, but you can see the contribution that that one company, a defence company, makes to the economy. It sustains 130,000 jobs, and importantly, in the supply chain. Almost 9,000 firms are in the supply chain of this one defence company. Now, why are supply chains important? They're critical. And in my view, it's the big distinction between rich countries and poor countries. The rich countries have supply chains, the poor countries do not. And why are supply chains so important? Because they comprise small, medium enterprises. And they're dedicated. They do one thing. They specialise in forgings, precision castings, sensors, cyber, whatever it is. And because they specialise, they're good. And they're also innovative. So supply chains are the repositories of innovation. And Indonesia suffers because of the low level of development of supply chains. It's improved over recent years, but there's still a great deal to do. So if you get one company in the defence area with 9,000 suppliers, you've got the potential for innovation. Productivity is 80% higher than the average. And here's the important part at the bottom there. 1,600 patents. And over the previous 5 years, over 4 billion spent on research and development by that one company. That one company. And in business, you need to invest in research and development to refresh your product range. Otherwise, you decline and die against the competition. And often, innovation in the product is associated with innovation in the process, reducing cost, improving quality, breaking the frontiers of knowledge, and also important relationships with industry. And that's the way I see this in university developing in the future. So, keeping on the importance of supply chains, innovation, and clusters, what we see here in France is a typical example of supply chains and what we call industrial and technological clusters. Now, in the UK, since the Industrial Revolution, the world's first industrial revolution, supply chains have evolved organically through a process of evolution. But here in France, and China, and Japan, and in other countries, the government has intervened to artificially promote supply chains and clusters. So here in Toulouse is the home of Airbus, a huge aerospace operation. And the French government has deliberately promoted technological clustering around that aircraft factory. Literally hundreds, if not thousands, of small, medium-sized enterprises are located proximate to its primary customer, the prime contractor, Airbus. Why? Because traditionally, classical theory argues that supply chains, if they're proximate, if they're close to their customer, encourages problem solving. The customer, Airbus, knows the technological innovation required, and the suppliers can deliver because they have the skills. So through proximity, they can talk to each other and engage in contributions to knowledge. And it's the same in southern France, in Marseille, the home of the world's biggest helicopter manufacturer, Eurocopter. Literally hundreds and thousands of small, medium-sized enterprises have deliberately relocated to be close to their prime customer. And in the process, it promotes innovation. I'm not sure what goes on in Indonesia, but this is one of the policies you need to promote. Clustering around Surabaya, Pitipau. Development of supply chains that are indigenous, not foreign. Because foreign suppliers located here will almost certainly be incorporating into their product high-value components and systems that have been imported from their home country. And up here in Paris is where the design bureau are located, competing against each other, linked to the universities, and also linked in real time to the manufacturers. This is the type of advanced technological clustering and supply chains that are absolutely essential for both civil and defense industrial development. And as I mentioned to you, I've chosen France, but the same thing is happening in China, where the Chinese are committed to breaking the international commercial aerospace duopoly between Airbus and Boeing. And they will, because they've got the resources and the commitment. And in each of their aerospace manufacturing areas, in Chengdu, Shanghai, Harbin, they're developing clustering and supply chains. And these are the supply chains. You've got to ask yourselves, as students of technology and commercial endeavor, where you're located on this strategic supply chain. Are you close to the base, where there's competition, and the focus is on raw materials and labor-intensive components? Are you near the top, which is where the sophisticated high technology systems are located. In the UK, we ensure that we've got capability at the prime contractor level and in the super subcontractor level. Lower down, we'll outsource across the world. It's low value. It's low skill. Possibly it will go to countries in Africa or in Asia. We're not interested. We're actually getting out of manufacturing, where you're trying to develop capability. We're getting out of it because high value is not located there anymore. Instead, it's to be derived from research, development, project management, systems integration, and we'll outsource everything else out. But that's beginning to change a little bit now, and I'll mention that to you a little bit later. So this is the process of globalization. Up into the second and first tiers, after the end of the Cold War, to reduce cost, we started to globalize and buy from the lowest cost supplier. So we get to revolutions, the final point here, driving civil military success. Now, I did edit a book many years ago now, and Dr. Rifty has referred to it. And this is the revolution in military affairs. Some academics still refer to this, the RMA. And I developed an important, I think it's an important, obviously I'm biased, but study framework, conceptual model to explain the concept. And this reflects the structure of teaching and research at Cranfield University, a focus on defense, technology, and management. This is the Venn diagram that describes and explains the revolution in military affairs. So first of all, we focus on the interface between defense and technology. This is smart technology. These are precision-guided weapon systems. This is the super weapon systems that are being employed today. And you often engage in coalition warfare with your allies, particularly the United States. And you also encourage international arms collaboration. So the same technology, the same weapon systems, the F-16s, can be used by different countries in the consortium. And so it improves the military capability. Here, we have technology management, which Indonesia should be focused on. Managing technology, managing innovation. Because technology isn't just about computers and microphones, the hardware. It's about intellectual capital. It's about human capital. That's also what's important, probably more important. Because if all you do is focus on manufacturing this, which often comes from an overseas supplier, then for the next generation of weapon systems, you will have to go back to that overseas supplier. You will be dependent. You will lack industrial sovereignty. Intellectual capital will help you develop your own solutions to next generation capability. So this is technology management. Defense industrial strategy, which the Americans have just launched. Offsets as a way of accessing technology. And civil military integration policies. Equally, over here in this interface, we're focused on ensuring that we manufacture the systems efficiently, to search for value for money, economy, efficiency, effectiveness, to achieve a revolution in business affairs, to reduce cost, to encourage innovation. And the revolution in business affairs is regarded as just as important as the revolution in military affairs, military transformation. Now, all of this comprises the revolution in military affairs. It's not just smart weapons, it's smart management. And The confluence of those three areas defines the revolution in military affairs, including innovation and technological development. So, we're starting to talk about technological revolutions. There was a Russian in the 19th century, Igor Kondratiev, who identified the existence of long waves of economic behavior. So not the short 10-year business cycle, but a 57-year long economic wave, which will introduce major transformations in the global economy. And these long economic waves tend to be associated with defense transformation. So there have been four major economic transformations. The first was in the beginning of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine. The second was 100 years later, where the focus was on machinery and mechanization and electricity. The third, starting after World War II, around 1950, focused on chemicals, electronics, information technology. Major transformations, just as occurred in defense. The movement to ironclad warships, blitzkrieg strategic doctrine of the Germans, nuclear warfare, and so on. And what we're moving into now, in the fourth industrial revolution, is a new stage of commercial, industrial, military revolution, technological revolution. The question for analysts is whether this change has been evolutionary, continuous, comprising incremental innovations over time, or whether it's reflected by dramatic, discontinuous change, revolutions. This is of analytical discourse importance. The really important issue is that they are occurring. And this one here, the fourth industrial revolution, is with us today, big time. And the focus is on autonomous systems, robotics, and artificial intelligence, cyber, and so on. Now, here's where I introduce my paper. So it's a slightly different perspective that you'll get from regular academics looking at the fourth industrial revolution. But it's interesting. And I've, with my son, started to examine the importance of biomimicry. And as I come across here, I'm looking at butterflies and insects, centipedes, and so on. Now, the interesting thing is, over generations, including the time of Charles Darwin, there is a recognition that animals, non-human animals, seek to conceal themselves, changing their color and shape like chameleons, octopus, and so on, to protect themselves against threats, and also to act as predators so that they are not noticed. And what we've done in this paper is apply experience and knowledge of biomimicry to the military. So there are three areas. First of all, camouflage. All your military in the TNI have camouflage uniforms. And it's been very important, this area, since the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. And what the Russians are now on the verge of introducing in the Ukraine conflict is an emulation of Harry Potter. If you read Harry Potter, which actually I haven't to my embarrassment, you will know that there was discussion of an invisibility cloak. And the Russians are there. And they're about to deploy these invisibility cloaks by their troops in the Ukraine conflict of massive strategic significance, because you won't be able to identify even the heat signature of human beings when they're preparing to attack. So technological transformation in terms of camouflage. Deception. In the First World War, the French and the British painted their warships with different colors to make them almost invisible once on operational service on the oceans. In the Second World War, the British forces under General Montgomery used deception by building tanks that were wooden dummies made of wood to deceive the German General Rommel that the British had more forces than they actually did have. In the Ukraine conflict, Ukraine is now deploying inflatable HIMARS rocket systems. Inflatable. So that when the Russians spot these HIMARS, they seek to take them out and reveal their own positions in the process, and then destroyed by the Ukrainian drones. So deception is employed today. It derives from animal behavior. And the Americans have gone one step further using artificial intelligence. And they've created what are called air-launched decoys, miniaturized air-launched decoys. And it's simply a pod bristling with electronics and artificial intelligence. And they're launched in big numbers, and then they use the electronics to masquerade as F-35 jets or F-22 Raptors. And the Chinese are deceived. And they don't know which are real manned combat aircraft and which are dummies. So this thing is happening today. And in terms of imitation, we've got three areas. So the paper talks about sea lions that have been recruited by the Americans during the Gulf Wars to identify mines and identify enemy divers to protect the fleet. There's also dolphins. It's incredible to believe that 25% of the United States nuclear submarines are protected by dolphins that have been trained to observe enemy activity. And they're monitored, and signals are sent through coded sounds to the American military authorities. 25% of the US nuclear submarines in a harbor in the United States. And also whales. The Chinese are now experimented in whale sounds to use them as coded messages for underwater communications. The Russians have recruited beluga whales. And one was spotted off the Norwegian coast in 2019. And on its back was strapped a harness which housed a military camera, stamped made in St. Petersburg. So these are really quite remarkable areas of mimicry in terms of animal deployment. Bioengineering, the second area of mimicry. Now, a lot of the work is being done in the United States, but also in China. And what the Americans are researching now are dragonflies to establish how dragonflies can utilize their flapping wing technology independently to hover and then strike like lightning. And this will be deployed in terms of animal robotics on military systems. Snails. The shells of snails are being researched to determine whether there are any lessons for bio-armor for the American troops. Woodpeckers that use their beaks to pummel away at trees where they've got an incredibly strong cranial skull structure are being explored to determine whether military helmets can be strengthened by examining these processes. Cyborg cockroaches are being developed by South Korea, China, and the US, where on the back of these cockroaches will be strapped backpacks containing microcircuits, and the cockroaches will be used in a futuristic way to reconnoitre enemy territory and send back signals. And finally, birds, really interesting, because birds are being studied to examine the process of murmuration. Murmuration, where you get flocks of birds moving autonomously in flight without hitting each other. So what we do know in Central Asia and the wars there and in Ukraine is the importance of drones. Drones. These are controlled generally by ground stations, which are human operated. But what the Americans and the Chinese are now developing in this third stage are autonomous systems that are not controlled by man, but controlled by themselves in flight. And we're not talking about one or two drones, autonomous drones. We're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, literally in swarms, that will attack the Chinese missile sites. Part of the swarm will peel off, enter buildings, attack, reform in the swarm, and continue. Not controlled by man, autonomous systems. And now you're developing swarms of swarms, where each of the swarms are coordinated by themselves, and the Chinese are developing anti-swarms. So can you see what's happening? The traditional nature of warfare is changing. No longer is there a dependence on manned combat aircraft. It's changing dramatically. The British, in collaboration with the Italians and the Japanese, are developing a 6th-generation fighter jet called the Tempest. It is a manned aircraft, but the co-pilot is an avatar, a virtual being. And what will happen is, if the aircraft engages in combat, so the pilot is focused on, obviously, attacking combat operations, the avatar will kick in and take over some of the other operations, reducing the burden on the pilot. And if the pilot is killed, the avatar will take control of the aircraft and land it. In America, F-16s have been developed so that they fly autonomously. No pilot. This is the dramatic pace of change that's occurring today. So while developing countries and some of the rich countries are continuing to develop and procure manned combat aircraft, the whole process of warfare is changing. What I mentioned to you right at the start of this talk is that there's a competitive rivalry, focus on competition. Not with the Russians anymore, they're distracted. Their economy is bankrupt. But between China and the United States, this is where the real economic war is taking place. And the Chinese believe that future warfare will be focused on machine-human hybridization, machine-human interface, a focus on intelligence warfare. So what the Chinese in particular are beginning to focus their research on is neuroscience. Genomics. And to give you an example of that, the Chinese have been experimenting with what are called microscopic water bears found in the oceans. And the Chinese have successfully extracted genes from these microscopic organisms and have inserted them into human embryonic stem cells, with the result that they've discovered that there's an increased resistance to radiation, potentially meaning that in the future there will be super PLA troops able to survive nuclear fallout. This is moving beyond defense as we know it. Dramatic transformation due to artificial intelligence and robotics and other future activities. So, what is going on now then is a process of deglobalization. And there's some dangerous implications for emerging states. The emerging states, right across the piece, have minimal research and development expenditure. Some of you come from Africa. And my own studies have suggested that there's almost zero research in defense R&D, expenditure on R&D. In the commercial area, 0.5 of 1%. So the poor countries have got minimal R&D expenditure. Rudimentary defense industrial structures, no supply chains, zero access to technology, and if they do access technology, it's low skill, low value, and the problem is affordability. No money, poor nations. And defense is expensive. So this equates to industrial vulnerability, strategic vulnerability. It's very difficult for you to see this, but in terms of general principles, the blue line, which has been declining since the Cold War, is the global defense expenditure. The yellow, well below, is Indonesia. Your average level of defense expenditure is substantially below the global average. And it's getting worse. In 2022, your defense expenditure was 0.7 of 1%. Last year, it was 0.6 of 1%. And in the future, it's expected to decline further. While all the other countries across the world almost are increasing defense expenditure because of increased military tension. Here is an interesting table. You can get access to these slides on Moodle, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you can see the dramatic military expenditure of the United States, and this is a few years ago, almost 800 billion US dollars. Down at the bottom here is Indonesia and Singapore. Singapore, with under 6 million people, a small island state, is spending more money on defense than Indonesia. And you've got 280 million people. 6 million against 280 million. Its GDP, national income per capita, is almost 60,000 US dollars per person. Yours is just over 4,000. Singapore's economic miracle means that it is now richer than its former colonial power. And one of the reasons why it's able to spend more money on defense is because of this ratio here, which we talked about earlier. Over 3% compared to your ratio at the time, 2020, of below 1%. So, it's about balance, getting the balance right between defence expenditure and civil economic development. So in conclusion, therefore, I would humbly suggest that the way forward in terms of securing your military capability is to increase research and development. Now remember what I said. Defence is increasingly about economic security, not just military security. So if you redefine your defence industry to capture many of the commercial, high technology, strategic industries, then you can increase the potential for development at the same time as indigenous military capability. And the focus would be on these 4 RIR technology areas: artificial intelligence, 3D printing, robotics, the next generation of warfare, where if you don't raise your capability, you face dangerous strategic implications in a hostile Asia-Pacific area. As I say there, the dramatic revolution, the transformation of 21st century warfare is the rise of military bots. And the question that I leave you with, for you to answer, not me, is whether going forward Indonesia is strategically vulnerable in an exceedingly hostile environment. And the last thing you want to be is dependent on overseas suppliers for your security. Can I thank you for your intellectual stamina? But it's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Matthews. Well, I think we still have a little bit extra time. I don't want to conclude, but I would like to have some of questions, you know. Seems there will be a lot of questions that we are having. Okay, let's start from the ladies first, yeah? Okay, this one. Please mention what's your name and where you come from.
Oh, thank you so much. My name is Aisha. I am a lecturer from the State Intelligence College, and currently I'm working in Indo-Pacific Strategic Intelligence. It's a new think tank in Indonesia. You gave a very interesting presentation, which raises several questions in my mind.
Did you say pessimistic?
No, not really. I think it's quite interesting in seeing your presentation, but probably there are several questions left for me. The first one is regarding the techno-state, techno-nationality that you mentioned, techno-nationalism, sorry, that you mentioned about Japan. And I think that if you take Japan's concept of techno-nationalism accordance to military technology diffusion theory, Japan is in the tier 5 and Indonesia is still in the tier 3 or 4. And I think it's quite difficult for us to actually make a leap into the 5th stage. So, in your opinion, how can we apply techno-nationalism concept in a relatively developing industry, which is still relies heavily on foreign technology, especially for the licensing of foreign military technology? The first is that. And my second question, it's about the ethics of new technology. I mean, we cannot deny that the UAV, for example, it has like a decreasing in the humanity aspect of the war, and it detaches the soldier from the ethical burden in the battlefield, as well as for the bionic soldier. I think that also raises a question regarding the ethical of like human experimentation. And so my question is like, how does pushback from the technology development affects the development in military industry? That's my question. Thank you.
Two good questions.
Will you respond one by one?
I'll have to, yeah. It's something to do with my age.
Okay.
I'll never remember all of the questions. Hey, listen, I understand what you're saying about Japan. But actually, Japan only entered the modern industrial arena in the mid to late 19th century. Yeah? Previous to that, it was a xenophobic country, isolated, no access to technology. Within just a few short decades, it had developed the military capability to engage the Imperial Russian Navy and defeat it at the Battle of Tsushima, and against the Chinese in Manchuria. How did it do that when it had no access, knowledge, experience of technology before that? You take Singapore. I spent 7 years there, and there's nothing special about the Singaporeans. They're just human beings like the rest of us. How can they possibly, since 1965, when the British left and didn't leave them with very much at all, transform their economy to such an extent that they're now regarded as the most industrialized countries in Southeast Asia, and as I said, as a higher per capita income than the UK. So, the message to me, anyway, is there's something wrong in this country. I've got to... Now, I don't know what it is, and I don't pretend to know. But it's the same with Africa. I've been to Africa many times, and it's rich in resources, and the people are highly intelligent and capable. It's got nothing to do with colonization. That's long gone. And if you talk about colonization, Singapore was colonized by the British for hundreds of years. And there's been no negative impact there. In Singapore, it had something, and I'm not making a comparison now with Indonesia, but it had something to do with leadership. Lee Kuan Yew. It had something to do with a collectivist strategy, national identity, national consensus, all working for the common good. It had something to do, besides culture, with a governmental interventionist strategy. And so we can go on, yeah? But there are cases, this is my point, where countries have been successful in economic transformation rapidly. And there's no reason, I think, why Indonesia shouldn't follow the same path. Now, the point about ethics is well put. You know, my background is development, not defense. And wouldn't it be nice not to have any conflict or war? And what is required now, particularly with artificial intelligence, is some form of international agreement on how the technology is used. Whether that's going to happen or not, I'm dubious. If you look at Ukraine, I think what happens in war often is that the rules of conflict are ignored because cluster bombs are being used. And there's lots of other horrible things happening. It's quite clear that we do need international control. But whether it's going to happen is another issue. The impact on developing countries from the introduction of artificial intelligence and these new highly capable systems is difficult to predict. I did read recently that the impact on developing countries won't be so high because they're primarily agricultural, which is a crazy argument. It means you're going to suppress development because of that fact. But clearly, I am concerned because we're going to evolve to a situation where the really rich countries that can afford research and development will develop military systems that can overnight destroy the conventional capability of many other countries. So it's changing completely. And ethics, sadly, might be a bystander in the process. Sadly.
Thank
Thank you. My name is Salahuddin Ahmad. I am from the Faculty of Economics, doctoral degree, doctoral programs. My background is actually technology, and I worked before in defense contractors in Indonesia. This one is a very, very interesting class about the Russia-Ukrainian war is actually showing that many paradigm in defense is matters. When the war happened between Russia and Ukraine, the analysts predict based on GDP, right? But when the war going on, the GDP of Europe, NATO against Russia is very, very uncomparable, right? The NATO GDP is much bigger, right? But when you see, so that's why the question is about how the factors, we are talking about the GDP, the military expenditure, right? And putting the per capita factors, but why you don't put factor, for example, like geography, like military doctrines, either it is defensive or offensive, that will determine much of this one. Because for example, like Israel and Palestinian conflict, right? The Hamas shoot rocket cost $200 and must be counter off by the 60,000 Iron Dome rockets, right? It's very, very incomparable in terms of cost. Hamas rocket is very, very cheap, very inaccurate, but the objective is to spread fear on Israeli to live in Israel, right? They reach the objective of this war. Yeah. So this one also and the factor of the GDP, when you see also about the Patriot system, for example, Patriot made by US, compared with the S-300 made by Russia. S-300 one rocket is $1 million, while the Patriot system is around $4 million. So when you talk about $100 billion spending of military, Russia and US is quite different. It doesn't count the same quantity, it doesn't count the same quality, right? And the second one is, yes. And the last one, I just want to comment about the Singapore budget more Indonesia, but we are Indonesia not worry, because in case conflict between Singapore and Indonesia, we just send smokes to Singapore. And then Singapore doesn't need the air defense system, they need the smokes defense system, because we send smoke from our forest in Riau and Sumatra to Singapore. Thank you.
So let me just take the last issue, if I understood correctly. Look, the Singaporeans have a strong military capability, but it's never been used operationally. It's been developed over a long period of time, but the armed forces, based around conscription, not a regular service, is an unknown quantity. In terms of their defense industrial capability, small island state, they have not sought to develop a 360-degree industrial capability because they're not big enough. They're not capable enough. They can't afford it. So what they do is focus on the high-tech radars, electronics, and so on. They'll buy the platforms from the Americans or the British, and then they will insert their own bespoke technology. What President Nathan called the secret technological edge. So, for instance, Malaysia may well buy the Apache helicopter, just like the Singaporeans have done. But the Singaporeans believe that they've got the competitive strategic edge because their Apaches are more technologically sophisticated than the Malaysians. I mean, I don't know, but that's the argument. In terms of your first question, it's a very interesting thesis. And we see it now in the Red Sea. The Yemenis firing simple rockets at very sophisticated warship platforms by the British and the Americans. They shoot down many of the Yemeni rockets, but the comparative cost is extraordinary. This is one of the first occasions when Western military systems have been engaging this type of threat. I am not a weapons expert, but my guess is what will happen is the process of defense industrial transformation will evolve and develop equally simple, cost-effective systems to counter this emerging threat. And it might be in relation to what I was discussing, the release of autonomous drones, which are remarkably inexpensive to counter the threat from the Yemenis. My understanding is that these missiles that the Yemenis are firing are coordinated and controlled by ground radar stations. The Americans are already seeking not so much to destroy the missile threat, but to destroy the radar stations. So I think in summation, when you get the emergence of technological developments, which are simplistic and rudimentary, but then there will be a response from the major powers to develop similar countermeasures to neutralize the threat. But that will take a little time.
Thank you. Well, our time is still very limited, but I need to take, from my student. Okay, Nezar, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Matthew. My name is Nizar. I'm from political science here in the last semester. So I always believe that the technological advancement has something to do with human behavior, including state behavior. And nowadays, especially about the technology in military, is really essential in human life, especially when it comes to state relationship. My question is, by the technological and military advancement, like artificial intelligence, the lethal autonomous weapon system, hypersonic weapons, directed energy weapons, biotechnology, quantum technology. And my question is, what's your position about this? Do you think this kind of technological advancement can create the new problem, can create the new crisis in the state relationship, which can lead the tension among them and led to the war, or it's only about the economic war? Or you have another position that this kind of technological advancement can lead for them to constrain or to reluctant to go to war? That's my question. Thank you.
I think the starting point is the upcoming US general election. Because if Trump is re-elected, I think we're all in trouble. And I say that from a personal position, because, you say it comes from human behavior, increased tensions and conflict. Actually, with Trump, it's the opposite. His perspective, Make America Great Again, is about isolationism, military nationalism. And from listening to him, his standpoint is that the United States will withdraw from NATO. If that does happen, I think it will raise the specter, the potential for maverick military action in Europe, because NATO will probably dismantle. And there are all sorts of emerging threats across the world. And what I didn't focus on there was the role of critical minerals. This is essential, this area, cobalt, lithium, and so on, for developing next generation weapon systems. And guess what? The Chinese monopolize on the mining refining and process of these minerals. Now, actively, the Americans and its allied partners are seeking to respond belatedly, which means that in 2022 they created what was called the Mineral Supply Partnership, deliberately to counter Chinese monopoly of these minerals. China has used the leverage in these minerals to deny the Americans access to them. So in different ways, the emergence of these new technologies can lead to different forms of economic warfare that potentially could also lead to geopolitical tensions and conflict, and ultimately to military destabilization. At the moment, you've got China and the United States in a standoff because of nuclear weapons. But often it's impossible to use nuclear weapons for lots of different reasons. So you have the threat with this new generation of weapons systems, the fourth industrial revolution, of engaging in different forms of warfare which reduces collateral damage, reduces casualties to military personnel, and therefore, in a sense, there's a greater likelihood of conflict. But I hope that that never happens. And what you need in the future, given the difficult and complex environment we're beginning to enter into, greater dialogue and communications between the Chinese and the Americans particularly over this new generation of warfare. But it won't be easy.
Okay, thank you. I think this would be the last
question.
One. Yeah.
Lucky you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Pak Rifki. Hello, Prof. I'm your former student at Indonesian Defense University, and I'm currently a student at RSIS Rajaratnham. I'm taking a PhD program there. So yeah, basically, well, thank you for your presentation. It's inspiring as always, but making me miserable when I reflect back into Indonesia's case. But my question, basically, I have two questions, short one. The first thing is, you mentioned several times about dependency, and you said that it is a bad thing, but I don't see that there is any country that is not dependent on other countries. But do you think it is possible that in the current situation, a country can be fully independent in terms of technology capability? And my second question, actually that brings me to to think about the independency of collective defense, such as NATO or another military alliance. So in that terms, I want to know your opinion regarding the defense industry cooperation in ASEAN. Do you think it is prospective or not? Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So I think the first point about dependency is a really important question. The United States and China are about the closest countries you can get to being fully self-sufficient in military capability. But in many areas, the Chinese are still dependent on external supply. UK, interesting case study of a country that is relatively small now, constrained by affordability, but still seeks to play a major role in international and military affairs. So it partners with the United States, special relationship. And we were the first tier partner on the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35, having spent over $2 billion to gain that status. Partnership. And in the summer of 2005, we approached the Americans for access to the software codes on the F-35 so that we could integrate our own weapons systems, missiles, and undertake our own technological midlife upgrades. What do you think the Americans said? No. full partner. They wouldn't give us access to the technology because they believed we might leak it to the French. So what we did 6 months later was we developed a defense industrial strategy, the first one in our history, December 2005. We didn't go for full self-sufficiency. We were pulling back from globalization and dependence on overseas countries because of security reasons. But what we did was we developed an S to the power of 3, selective self-sufficiency. In other words, we developed a strategy where we identified those technologies which we believed critical for our operational freedom, but not all technologies. We selected just what we believed were the critical ones. So we achieved affordability and we achieved self-sufficiency in those areas which we believed to be important. So you can use that example to develop a strategy where you don't become self-sufficient, but it's a halfway house in terms of maintaining military equipment in service, in operation. The other one about collective defense, it's really interesting that. I don't have a lot of time now, but during the Gulf conflict, we discovered that we could ship across main battle tanks, Challenger main battle tanks, to the Gulf to engage in conflict, but we didn't have the shells. We didn't have 120 millimeter shells. Why? Because the government wasn't buying shells. We were in a period of relative benign environment, peaceful. And so the MOD reduced the procurement of shells. BAE Systems, that was producing the shells, couldn't make any money if there's no production, so it closed the production lines. No problem. We went to the Belgians. I hope there are no Belgian people here. We went to our friends, the Belgians, and we asked if we could buy some shells. They refused. Member of NATO, but they refused because they didn't believe in the war. So even collective defense can be a problem. There's nothing that surpasses defense industrial sovereignty, but it's expensive. That's the problem. And ASEAN is an economic organization, and a few years ago there was an attempt to collectively engage in commonality in the production of military equipment. It was a failure. One of the problems was the dominance of Singapore. So there's no easy answer to that one. I think with a collective defense organization, you do have additional security against external threat. But a country as big as Indonesia shouldn't actually require that collectivism. It should be a major military power in its own right. Should be.
Well, thank you. This is final and a final one. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, for brilliant presentations. In your conclusion, you said that Indonesia is strategically vulnerable.
Question mark.
Yeah. Well, I want to make this like a positive statement, right?
Yeah.
In terms of its military capacity.
Yeah.
Well, if you were appointed as the Minister of Defense, right?
Yeah.
In replace of this one that is going to be the president, what would you put on plan strategically?
Yeah.
In terms of, for instance, budget allocations,
Yeah.
right? Or the size of it,
Yeah.
or whether you are going to, develop ethno or techno-nationalisms.
Yeah.
This is the first question. And the second is that, we have got numbers of resources, domestic, military industries.
Yeah.
How you would look at these things, whether they are liable or this is a potential to the military development? Thank you.
This is a really naughty question as a final question. The thing is, by comparative standards, there should be no disagreement that your level of defense expenditure here is remarkably low. I mean, there should be no discussion about that. And particularly at a time when, right across the piece, right across the world, defense expenditures are rising, but in Indonesia, they're declining. So there is something, nothing to do with Ron Matthews, there's something interesting here in that comparison. So I guess the first thing I would do would be to try and increase defense expenditure. Reverse that trend. Because we're talking about defending your sovereignty. Now, you're not the only country. The UK in particular, and Germany, over the last decade, have been reducing defense expenditure in the face of a rising threat in Russia. I say rising threat because it's been engaged in conflict in Crimea and other countries over that long period of time. And it has been annually increasing its defense expenditure. Why have we been reducing our defense expenditure? Because of perceived priorities in welfare, health, COVID, and so on. But now we're increasing defense expenditure, and rapidly, and particularly the Germans, because they have a border with Russia and a history. So that's the first thing I'd do. The second thing is I would seek to develop an appropriate strategy for revitalizing your armed forces. For instance, it's all about affordability. You are buying lots of foreign military equipment at the moment. It's impressive. But how are you buying that equipment? You're getting the suppliers to provide you with credit. You have an offset policy which includes counter-purchase, barter, which suggests you haven't got the reserves to procure military equipment through your own resources. This has got to change. Affordability is essential to sustain military capability. So one of the things I would look at very carefully now is the structure of your defense industry. I think research and development is critical. I think the focus should be on embroidering into your defense industry increasing numbers of private companies focused on innovation, these new technologies. Now, I'll tell you one thing. I see the policies of Indonesia, and they mirror almost exactly what I'm saying. But there's no money. There's no money. And so there's no relevance in having the policies unless you support them. And it is painful, but if they are civil military, there could be dual beneficial spin-offs to both defense development and civil development.
Thanks a lot. Okay, let's give applause to Professor Matthew.